LiSTNR production.
Hi, Sasha Barbagat with you. Welcome to The Briefing. Few crimes in Australia in recent years have been as shocking as the murder of Bruce Saunders, who was fed into a woodchipper on a property north of Brisbane in 2017.
Is this woman a psychopath? Is she born like this? Was she made like this? Surely people don't just wake up one day and decide to kill, supposedly for purely greed.
Now, a new investigative podcast has uncovered fresh details about Sharon Graham and how she convinced a man to kill Saunders and another to help in the cover-up. That's coming up in the second half of this episode. First, though, it's time for the headlines with Antoinette Lattouf. Today's Wednesday, October 23.
Hey Sasha, g'day everyone. The King and Queen will wave a royal goodbye to Australia today after wrapping up their tour. So hundreds of people turned out yesterday in Sydney to catch a glimpse of Charles and Camilla at the Opera House, where the pair did a meet and greet with well-wishers. And earlier in the day, they visited an Indigenous cultural centre where the King was reminded of the protest by Lydia Thorpe the previous day.
We've got stories to tell. And I think you witnessed that story yesterday.
Yeah, that story was You're Not My King. And that was Alan Murray from the Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council speaking directly with Charles yesterday. And he was referencing the Senator's protest at Parliament House. The monarchs also had a go at barbecuing, flipping snags awkwardly on a barbecue at a community event in Western Sydney. And the King found the tongs to be a little bit curious, saying, "Oh, they're long, aren't they?"
Yeah, so relatable. Hashtag relatable from the monarch. But I've got to say, I did find him quite well-natured and kind of, we have so little in common with British royalty. And I did find him quite, he was willing to crack a few jokes and kind of, he hugged, one of the men at the Indigenous Cultural Centre. He wasn't kind of being overly hoity-toity. So I thought they did a pretty good job. Look, next stop is Samoa, where they'll attend the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. Anthony Albanese and Penny Wong will also attend the event. And another rumoured guest, Antoinette, billionaire Elon Musk. I haven't been able to figure out why he's going there, but apparently he is set to be among the visitors to the great nation of Samoa to engage in this meeting. Over to Russia now, where China's Xi Jinping and India's Narendra Modi are among over 20 world leaders attending the 16th BRICS summit. The three-day meeting of 36 of the world's developing economies is underway, with the Kremlin trying to expand its financial ties, obviously hit pretty hard by Western sanctions, but also demonstrate the perceived failure of US-led efforts to isolate it from the international stage over the Ukraine invasion. Now, if you're wondering, BRICS, BRICS, was an acronym initially coined in the early 2000s to refer to the emerging economies and relations of Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa. It has since rapidly expanded to include Iran, Egypt, Ethiopia, the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia.
Yes, Sasha, and other countries like Turkey, Azerbaijan and Malaysia have formally applied to become members. And Putin is set to hold around 20 bilateral meetings on the sidelines of the summit. So he met with Modi before it all kicked off yesterday, praising their privileged strategic partnership, while the Indian PM said he wanted peace in Ukraine and that New Delhi was ready to help achieve a truce. Now, the Russian president is adamant that global economic growth will be driven by BRICS, not the West, because the bloc currently accounts for 45% of the world's population and 35% of the global economy. Look, and I think America, while perceived as the leader of the free world, with BRICS growing, it appears that it's perhaps no longer the powerhouse it once was, and alliances like BRICS, I think, are demonstrating that. But keen to ease pressure from Western sanctions, the Kremlin leader will hope to convince BRICS members to adopt an alternative to the dollar for global payments. I think it's important to note that there are some tensions there, Sasha. It's not one big alternative happy family. China and India are doing their best to avoid wanting to attack each other. There's also tension between two of the newest BRICS members, Egypt and Ethiopia. And despite talks of a detente, Iran and Saudi Arabia have long been regional rivals.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. And like you said, I think it shows, that I used to do a podcast that looked at global relations and it's been really interesting to watch how things have shifted over time. And BRICS is one of those alliances that kind of shows that there's this, like, what did you call them? Alternative family. I think that's a fair point. And with India, obviously, there are now more Indians than Chinese people. It is a huge economy and it's only growing. So its influence in these spaces is worth paying attention to.
Staying abroad, Sasha, Hezbollah have claimed responsibility for the drone attack on Netanyahu's holiday house in northern Israel. So that was last week. The Israeli leader, who has an arrest warrant request from the ICC for war crimes, he wasn't home at the time. And the militant group also admitted that some of its fighters have been taken captive by the Israeli military. Netanyahu's also released a statement, a joint statement between him and Blinken. Blinken is in Israel on talks, but the statement did not mention anything about a ceasefire. So it seems as though the violence in Lebanon and occupied Palestinian territories will continue. And just a quick warning before we get into the next story, it discusses sexual abuse and trafficking. The former CEO of American clothing label Abercrombie Fitch has been arrested, accused of trafficking young men for sex. Now, Michael Jeffries, who is 80 years old, his partner and another man will face federal charges after years of sexual misconduct allegations. That includes that Jeffries used to lure young men on the promise of modelling contracts and pressure them into sex acts.
This trio is accused of operating an international sex trafficking and prostitution business that recruited young men for alcohol and drug-fueled parties in the US and abroad, and that's according to a 16-count indictment. Look, these crimes allegedly happened between December 2008 and March 2015, and that is while Jeffries was still CEO of Abercrombie. He finished up in 2014, Antoinette.
Yeah, and prosecutors allege that Jeffries and his co-conspirators spent millions of dollars to create a massive infrastructure around these sex events. One of the alleged victims told the BBC, "This experience, I think it broke me. I think this stole any ounce of innocence that I had left. It mentally messed me up. But the language I now have today, I can sit here and tell you that I was taken advantage of."
The mighty Murray River has been given global recognition by National Geographic, named as one of the top 25 places to travel to in 2025, winding through Victoria, South Australia and New South Wales for an impressive 2,500 k's. The organisation has recognised the waterway on its Best of the World 2025 list. Now, this is because the Murray is getting this new cruise line, which starts up next year, and it'll offer multi-night stays on board, which I think would be a lovely little trip. Also making the cut on this list, Bangkok in Thailand, Guadalajara in Mexico, Greenland and LA for its arts scene.
Yeah, it's an impressive nod. I do think it's important to note, Sasha, that 80% of the Murray-Darling Basin's river valleys were rated as being in poor or very poor health. That's according to the Nature Conservancy Australia. And there is a lot of passing the buck about that. The Murray-Darling Basin Authority has been established to protect it.
Yeah, and maybe getting the nod on this list will incentivise governments to, do their bit to look after it. Like you said, the authority has been established and the current federal government is working on it. But yeah, there's so many things that rely on the Murray-Darling Basin. It provides 1/3 of Australia's food supply and also accounts for $19 billion worth of agricultural output. So its impact not only on the travel scene but also on us here and our ability to eat and drink clean water is super important.
And a cockatoo has been freed from a Sydney Coles after spending a month trapped inside. The bird, which was given the nickname Mickey, survived off brioche as numerous attempts to get him out the doors failed over the past 4 weeks. Yesterday, another cockatoo named Old Lady Doris was brought in to help coax him down and make him feel comfortable enough to be retrieved by wildlife experts. Mickey is apparently in good health, with hopes he'll be flying free within the next day or two. Sasha, I have a theory. I think he's an ACCC stooge. Mickey is in there to oversee price gouging.
Well, it sounds like he did a good job. He was there for a month, so I'm sure he would have kept a very close eye on all the happenings at Coles. This is a really busy Coles. It's in southwest Sydney, in Campbelltown. And the poor thing, by all reports, was really terrified, and he couldn't figure out that the humans around him were just trying to help him out. So he was staying well clear of everyone, which is why it took so long to get Mickey free. They did leave traps out, but yeah, he was just super wary of humans. And one of the wildlife experts made the point that he hasn't been in the dark for a month, which I think would really kind of screw with your, natural circadian rhythms and also, its health. So I'm glad that they're keeping a close eye on him. It sounds like he's okay though, and they're going to let him free soon. So, and a shout out as well to old lady Doris. It sounds like she was the one that got him down in the end. Lovely story to finish off today, Antoinette. Next up, we are changing pace in a big way. We are talking about a new investigative podcast that's uncovering more details about one of Australia's most shocking murders.
Hey, Bension Siebert here. At first, it seemed like a horrific accident.
Went inside, got my phone, and I dialed 000, and they said, "Who do you want?" And I said, "You better just send everybody. My friend's gone through the woodchipper."
But within days, police began to suspect the death of Bruce Saunders was no accident.
The reporting of the death, which was reported as accidental, may not be the case.
Oh, sorry, so does that mean it's a murder investigation?
We're treating it as a homicide investigation, yes.
But how did a suburban grandmother convince her lover to murder her ex in the most brutal way possible, and another man to help cover it up? How did she become the kind of person capable of such a crime? Were there signs this was going to happen, and did anyone miss them? These are some of the key questions central to a new investigative podcast series out today. It's called Crime in Focus: Killer Charm. The journalist behind it is LiSTNR's very own Tara Cassidy. Tara, welcome to the briefing. For those who might have missed this case, catch us up. What do people need to know?
So essentially, 5 years ago, I stepped into a courtroom and began covering this court case, which would just go on to be one of the most horrific, callous stories that I've ever heard. And it was about this suburban grandmother from Queensland who had supposedly orchestrated the murder of her ex-partner. But the prosecution and police were saying that she had essentially not committed the physical act herself, but convinced two other men to commit the act, one of them to commit the act and another to aid in the cover-up. And learning about that dynamic and the fact that she was charged with counselling and procuring a murder was really interesting and just not the type of charge that you often hear in a courtroom.
Absolutely. It's a fascinating and horrific case, really. What kept you coming back to this story over the years?
There's so many things about it that made it unusual. So there's obviously the devastating facts of the crime, which was this beautiful man, a doting dad, Bruce Saunders. He was murdered on a rural property after being fed into a woodchipper. It's horrific. It's gruesome. That's obviously not something you hear about every day. Then there was the supposed perpetrator. She was a kind of person that I had never seen accused of such a brutal, gruesome crime. She was this unsuspecting grandmother, well-pruned, looks well-to-do, and she has the nickname Muffin and just looks like any lady that would walk past you in the shopping centre. And then you learn about the horrific parts of this case and what she's been allegedly involved in. And there was also just mountains of evidence, the police investigation. There was covert police recordings, handwritten notes about supposed other murder plots.
I didn't lie. I told them all the things right and honest to what I could do. And that's my truth.
The story that you are telling us is unbelievable. So this is your opportunity to tell us what happened behind that machine.
It was far-fetched, it was callous, it was calculated. It was just all of those things, and it was really not like anything else I'd covered before, despite covering court and crimes all the time.
Obviously, in this podcast, Killer Charm, you'll hear about that gruesome murder, but The podcast does a lot more than that. Can you tell us about your approach to reporting this?
Yes, so having been in and out of the courtroom over the last 5 years covering this case, the murder trial, the gruesome crime, that has been covered. People have learnt about some of the basics of the case. But what people don't know is the lead up to that, everything that led to that point. I did an in-depth investigation into it for about a year and have essentially been trying to figure out, is this woman a psychopath? Is she born like this? Was she made like this? Surely people don't just wake up one day and decide to kill, supposedly for purely greed. And so I have gone back and I've spoken to people that knew her, partners, her daughter at the time, and found out so much more about this woman and uncovered essentially a pattern of behaviour, pattern of manipulation and greed that had been going on for years. And I would say uncovered essentially that she is a con artist. And there have been many people that she's done things to and impacted their lives well before Bruce Saunders, who was the victim of this particular case.
Can you tell us a little bit about the narrative arc that the series goes on and the journey that you take throughout it?
There will be 6 episodes, and it starts with, naturally, we learn a little bit about the crime that actually happened through the eyes of a woman whose property it took place on. And we start to learn about when did the suspicions turn to this grandmother, Sharon Graham. And we learn about the very first calls and information that came through to the police. Then once we've heard about this woman and realised, okay, she's on police's radar, we start to try and understand a bit more about her. How did she know all of the men that were on the property that night? What was her relationship to them? What did she have over them? If they're saying that she supposedly convinced these men to do the act, why? What did she have on them that she has so much influence? And so we'll unpack that a little bit. You'll learn about each of the people that were there. And then you meet her daughter, Rebecca, who is just incredible given everything that she has endured. And you hear more about her life and when she has touch points with her mum and the impact she's had well before all of this. And it paints a real picture of the woman that Sharon Graham was outside of this case. And you learn every facet of her and what she's like as a friend, family member, partner.
She got all her men off the internet, except for one that I know of. But I don't think she ever really loved any of them. I don't think she knew how to.
And then we take you through, you'll hear there's parts of never before heard police interviews that we've managed to get, as well as there was 16,000 hours of covert listening device recordings that the police got while doing this investigation. And so you'll hear some of the ones that were played in court, and they've never been aired before either. So we take you through all of that. You'll hear the police tactics that were used, and we'll marry them up against each other so you can see them in effect. And then we will take you through the court cases relating to the crime, and you'll find out the outcome as well as where all of the people that have been touched by this case are now.
You mentioned a number of people who are close to Sharon. I think you spoke with her daughter, former best friend, ex-partners. What did you hear from some of those people?
You got someone living with you that's sleeping in a separate bedroom and has blocked you on all social media platforms. You're not getting anything, and you're giving it all your money. That's why I used to say, mate, you're in a toxic relationship.
Stop getting these men off the internet. It's not healthy. It's not good for you. But she had that need and she needed to have a man.
It's been interesting to speak to each of them, enlightening in some cases, devastating in others. Essentially just that every single one of them has their own story of Sharon Graham. Sharon Graham as the partner, as the mother, like you said, as the best friend. And the common theme that I've found among all of them is that they are each victims in a sense themselves. They have all been profoundly impacted by this woman's actions, whether it be relating to this case or their own time with her. And she has just had this enormous ripple effect on all the people's lives that have been relating to the case and to the crimes, obviously the victim, the family and friends of the victim, but her own inner circle who have just, their lives have been changed by this and by her actions. And many of them have said that they're just unable to trust again. Many haven't wanted to be in relationships since Sharon. And her own daughter has to grapple with this and deal with this every day. It's something that won't escape them. So it's been really interesting to hear their perspective and hear their stories in their own voice.
Where's the case at now?
Like I mentioned, this case went through the courts for many, many years. There was mistrials, there was murder trials. The people that were convicted of murder relating to this case were found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. But interestingly, they've since lodged their intention to appeal those outcomes. So essentially, the people that were found guilty of murder are trying to now get out of that conviction. But that's essentially before the courts and for them to decide if they'll proceed with it and let that application be heard.
Reporting on any kind of crime is obviously difficult work, but reporting on a murder is particularly hard. How did you approach doing that with the complexity involved and the sensitivity involved?
It is a tough job reporting on some of the most harrowing, difficult, awful moments of people's lives. Naturally, any crime-related stories that you're literally trying to cover a case that, it's this chapter of a family or of friends' lives that is the worst moment of their lives. So you have to go about it in a sensitive, empathetic, trauma-informed way. So this series was not about just trying to dredge up the past for no reason. It's been covered by media in a sense. The court case has been through, but we're hoping to do it so that we could tell the full story. There were many people that spoke who were witnesses in the case who were actually never able to tell their full story because of really strict rules about what is allowed as evidence in court. So this series was about giving people the opportunity to tell their story, have their own voice, and we've tried to go about it thinking of all of those people who've been impacted as we do it, and trying to tell an awful story in the most sensitive, empathetic way that it can be done.
It's impossible to report on a story like this, certainly in the depth and over the years that you've done it, without it having some impression on you yourself. Can I ask, do you think that this has made you look at your own relationships in any kind of different way after reporting these stories?
I say all the time that my job has enormously impacted me as a human being because of the stories that we cover. And yes, the more horrendous and the more of an emotional toll that it has, the bigger impact it does have on me. And so this story, as well as many of the others that I've covered, have changed the way I see the world, the way I behave, the things that I approach with more caution. How trusting I might be. You can't hear some of these things and still feel the same way about society, unfortunately. But there is a positive, and I think having covered this case for so long and speaking to the people that were impacted by it, seeing them 5 years ago and then speaking to them now, and seeing that they are making progress and they're healing from what's happened and they're doing great things with their lives and putting this woman and her behaviours and her crimes behind them and living really fulfilling lives. So that's been really great to see firsthand, because often you'll just cover a case and a story and touch it on a couple of days and then you never get to hear what happened to all those people. So that's been really nice to be able to kind of come full circle And you'll hear about it all in this series and the way that this has impacted everyone and kind of where they're at now. So that's at least a positive in the end.
Well, that's a great way to finish up. Tara Cassidy, thanks so much for joining us on The Briefing.
Thanks so much, Bension.
Investigative journalist Tara Cassidy there. She's the host of LiSTNR's newest podcast, Killer Charm. Episodes 1 and 2 are out today, and you can hear them first exclusively on the free LiSTNR app. Just search Crime in Focus Killer Charm. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Briefing. That's it for now. If you want to keep up with our other content, you can check us out on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast and on TikTok and YouTube. Just search LiSTNR Newsroom. We'll be back in your feed with another episode this afternoon from 3. I'm Bension Siebert. Catch you next time.
LiSTNR.